Good morning Year 9, and this is our last distance learning lesson of the week, looking at the topic B form, and we're revisiting that aerobic and anaerobic respiration today. So here's our title: How do the reactants for respiration get to cells? Okay, so let's write our date and our title, please. I think we kind of started talking about this yesterday. It's quite a straightforward lesson today, so it should be quite easy for us to get through. How do the reactants for respiration get to cells? And we're going to do some more recap learning from the topic B1 today as well. If you need extra time, pause now. So first of all, we're going to do ourselves a basic structure of the lungs picture. You can see at the top we've got the windpipe here called the trachea. That branches into the bronchi, bronchi being the plural, bronchus being singular, one of them. So one of those tubes is a bronchus and two of them together is the bronchi. They branch out like this into many branches called the bronchioles, and they end in the tiny air sacs at the end called the alveoli. And one of those is the alveolus, or an alveolus. Okay. And we've got this muscle at the bottom here called the diaphragm, and this is really important at helping our lungs to inflate when we inhale and deflate when we exhale. So we're going to draw just a simple version of that, much simpler than that picture on there. Just draw two lungs, the trachea coming in, branch off some branches and draw one set of alveoli at the end, okay? And it's really important that we sequence it in the right order, okay? So we start with the trachea, then through the bronchi or the bronchus, through into the bronchioles, and then finally stopping at the alveoli at the end of that network. Okay, if you need extra time, then pause now. So we're looking at that alveoli, and we can see it kind of looks like a bunch of grapes, kind of looks like the end of broccoli, but you can see this massively high surface area. And our question says, how does the oxygen get from the air to the respiring cells? Okay, and yes, it says it's a B2 recap, and we haven't done B2 yet. It's also a B1 recap. So it's that process, diffusion. When we breathe in, we end up with a high concentration of oxygen in this alveoli. And that moves across by diffusion into that blood capillary because there is a low concentration of oxygen in the blood. It was all used up at those cells that were respiring. And so there's a low concentration in the blood, and that's why diffusion moves that oxygen across. And it's the same but opposite with the carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide is a product of respiration, so it arrives at the lungs in high concentration, and it's low concentration in the air we breathe, so it moves across by diffusion, and then we can exhale it. So if we can write two sentences, one about oxygen diffusing from high concentration to low concentration, and then another sentence about carbon dioxide. And here are the adaptations of the alveoli. Large surface area achieved by this kind of broccoli structure. Very, very thin, okay? This is one cell thick and one cell thick on the capillary as well. There has to be moisture there. Okay, these gases don't jump across as gases, they move across by diffusion, dissolved in a liquid. And we can see this large network of blood capillaries, lots and lots of places for that oxygen to move to. If we need any extra time on that slide, pause now. Okay, again, we're now looking at how the glucose gets from the small intestine into the respiring cells. This picture here is a section of the small intestine, and you can see they've enlarged this section here with all of these folds. They're called the villi. We came across those in B1, and the villi have on the microvilli as well, which increases the absorption rate even more. You can see the microvilli over here. And we've got this large network of blood capillaries, and it's exactly the same process. So we've got this, all of the same adaptations, but in addition we've got the microvilli. And the glucose is a small and soluble molecule, so it moves across from the small intestine through the villi into the blood capillaries by diffusion. But we've got this extension question at the top. Let's have a look at that. Once glucose has reached equilibrium, that means it's reached the same concentration in the small intestine and in the blood capillary. Okay, so diffusion goes from high concentration to low, but once enough glucose has gone into the blood, they get to the same level. We call that equilibrium. How does the last bit transfer to the blood? So let's think about our movement of molecules from B1. We know that it starts off with diffusion. We know it can't be osmosis because that is the movement of water and we're moving glucose. So there's one more movement of molecules. See if you can remember it. And it's that movement from low concentration to high concentration. It's what I call the greedy one, trying to get as much of that glucose over as possible. And hopefully you've guessed it by now, it's active transport, okay? So the first part of the glucose moves across by diffusion. When the concentration of glucose in the small intestine and in the capillaries reaches an equilibrium, it gets to the same point, then we have that extra movement by active transport. And active transport, if you remember, uses energy. So we wouldn't want to use that process to move glucose all the time because we'd use up too much energy, but it's an efficient way of getting all of that glucose that we can benefit for in the process of respiration from the small intestine and into the blood. Difficult concept, that one, but a good one if you can get your head around it. Okay, if you need any extra time, then pause now. So we'll revisit this equation that we saw yesterday. We do not need to write anything for this because we wrote this yesterday, but you can just see in summary, we've got the intestines, we've just talked about that, the alveoli, diffusion, and carbon dioxide leaving again by diffusion. And we talked about how when we breathe onto a window, we see that water vapour. We sweat out some of that water and some is lost as urine. So that's just a review, reminder. We've got that in our book, so I'm going to skip on from that quite quickly. Now, if you look in the playlist on my YouTube channel, you will see Year 9 distance learning. It's called B4 and it says lessons complete or sort of complete lessons or something like that. This video is in there. It's only about a minute and a half. You don't have to watch it if you don't want to. It follows the path of the air through the lungs, but the last statement in this video is incorrect. Okay, so if you do want to watch it, then watch it now. Okay, so stop this video, go over to that video and watch it, and then come back. Now, if you have watched that video, you'll see the very last statement says this process is known as respiration, and they're actually describing breathing. And it's a really common misconception that people have, is that breathing and respiration are the same thing. We must remember that respiration is this chemical reaction. It's a reaction happening inside the cells in the mitochondria, releasing that energy from the glucose. Breathing is just this process of the oxygen going into the blood and carbon dioxide coming out of the blood. It is not respiration. It's part of the respiratory system, and I think that's maybe where people go wrong, but respiration is this chemical reaction. It is not the same as breathing. Okay, moving on. So we learnt that photosynthesis is an endothermic reaction using that light energy. respiration is releasing energy, and it's the reverse of photosynthesis, so we describe it as an exothermic reaction. The only thing you need to write from this slide is that final statement at the bottom. Respiration is an exothermic reaction releasing energy from glucose. And if you need extra time, pause now. Okay, some of that energy that's released by respiration, these are the uses of it in our bodies. Okay, so chemical reactions to build larger molecules, we would call that protein synthesis, and we'll talk about that in year 10. Movement, so any activity that we do, we need energy to do it. And keeping warm, which we call maintaining body temperature. We are warm-blooded, so that means we maintain our own body temperature. So when we release that energy from the glucose using the process respiration, this is some of the ways that we use that energy. If we could copy the slide, please. Okay, if you need extra time, pause now. Okay, so we've got a quick recap here. I don't think we need to write this down. I think we can just talk it through and then move on. So the purpose of respiration, that was to release energy from the glucose we've eaten. Where in the cell does respiration occur? It's the mitochondria. What is the energy used for? We've literally just had that on the slide. That was movement, building molecules in chemical reactions, and it was maintaining body temperature. Where and how does the glucose get into the blood? It's through the small intestine, through those tiny villi, and it moves in by diffusion and then active transport. Where and how does the oxygen get into the blood and then the cells? It's at the alveoli, and it's by diffusion, going into the capillaries and then being transported to the cells. I don't think you need extra time on there. I don't think we need to write anything down on that one, but if you do want extra time, then pause now. Okay, we've only got a couple of slides left. So we did our hand exercise yesterday, and we felt that pain of going from aerobic respiration into anaerobic respiration. We know that aerobic respiration stops when exercising. The muscles that use more energy go from aerobic respiration into anaerobic respiration. The heart beats faster to try and get more of that glucose and oxygen to the cells, and also remove those waste products, the carbon dioxide and the water. And our breathing rate, so how many breaths we take per minute, and the breath volume, so how much we breathe in each breath, increases. But if there is insufficient oxygen supplied to the muscles, aerobic respiration will stop and anaerobic respiration will take place. That was information that I think we've already covered in lessons. That's why it's a prepare for learning, because we're now going to move on to how that transfers into anaerobic respiration. So we should have known already in this topic that the heart beats faster, breathing rate increases, and depth of breath increases also. If you need extra time on that slide, pause now. Okay. So anaerobic respiration, we looked at this last lesson where we said that it's the glucose being broken down to form lactic acid. It's inefficient because the breakdown of that glucose is incomplete, so less energy is released. And that lactic acid that builds up causes a burning sensation when we exercise. We need to get rid of that lactic acid as soon as we've stopped exercising. We've got to break it down and remove it when exercise stops. And we'll look at that in a couple of lessons' time. Okay, so we'll go into some more detail about how we get rid of that lactic acid. Okay, if you need any extra time on that slide, pause now. And that is the end of our lesson today. So next lesson we're going to be looking at anaerobic respiration in yeast, which is a bit different, and then we'll go back to looking at exercise, and we'll be looking at your fitness in the lesson after that. Okay, so I'll see you again next week. and we will look at yeast. Hope you enjoyed that. Thank you.